Welcome to the 6G podcast. It is episode 256, and it's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G. We cover about six topics in roughly 30 minutes. Actually, I would say we cover six topics in about 30 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshel and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Mike Dano from Ookla. Thanks again for joining us today, Mike.
Hey, glad to be here. How's it going?
Good. Um, I think I'm jet lagged. I'm not sure. But I did get make it back from London, which will be my first topic. But I'm also headed to China next week, so there's no rest for the wicked.
That you're having the most relaxing summer imaginable, it sounds like. Good for
Yup,
you. Yep.
yep.
Yeah.
I always hope and dream that I will have a relaxing summer, and then I don't. How about you?
Well, I'll take all the relax. We're headed out on a family vacation next week for the next 3 weeks. So just while you're working, just know I'll be sitting on a beach somewhere in Spain.
I'm very happy for you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, I think that'll kick us off with our first topic, which is I was at Unpacked in London, and thankfully I am lucky enough to have show and tell. So if you're watching the live stream, I'm holding both the Fold 8 and the Fold 8 Ultra. The Ultra is the big boy, and the Fold 8 is the small boy. They both run on the new Snapdragon uh, 8 Elite Gen 5. They also announced new smartwatches, including, I also have more show and tell, the watch. This is the Watch 9. Um, and the Watch 9 also runs on a Snapdragon chip, which is a big deal because it is the first time Samsung has ever used anybody but their own chips in their watches. And I will tell you, the performance difference is noticeable because uh, I can actually use Gemini on my watch and it's not a slow, you know, like molasses. So that's cool. It's a great experience. Battery life is incredible on all these devices, but the foldables are cool. And this is like the new form factor that everybody's excited about because it's very similar to what a lot of people are expecting the iPhone to have for their foldable. So everything's still 5G. Um, we won't see 6G devices probably until next year, maybe even the year after that. Um, and yeah, it's just interesting because it's it's the progression of the mobile form factor. I think it's the future in a lot of ways. And yeah, they finally started using silicon carbon anodes to increase the battery capacity, so it has great battery life as well as incredible performance, beautiful screen. I actually took this with me to the baseball game last night and was watching the live pitch accuracy as well as watching the live um, social media stream and being able to do both while also watching the game. And I consider that peak baseball experience. I could also order food while I'm doing that because I just have two screens basically in my hand. But yeah, this is going to be the future, I think. And I'm going to be using these for a while. I'll have reviews sometime soon. But really, the big deal is that Samsung went all Qualcomm, and that they really did upgrade a lot on the watch and um, on the phones. And I have the Ultra coming tomorrow, which is the big boy version of this, which gets even more battery life, same chipset, but that one has cellular. And that one, you can basically use like a smartphone almost and just pair it to your earbuds and take calls from it, like any, cellular connected smartwatch. But this chipset that's in these watches already has a modem built in. So that's also a cool feature. I think it's Red Cap, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and yeah, it was a fun time in London. I got to go around the city taking pictures on the phones and doing smartphone launch things. And yeah, we'll probably see another launch from Samsung sometime in the January timeframe when they refresh the S series. So they now have like a dual flagship strategy where they have the folds in the fall and the candy bars in the spring or the winter, depending where you live. And the only other thing is, this new foldable fits in between the Flip and the Fold 8 Ultra. So now they have a three-tiered foldable strategy that kind of satisfies the different types of potential foldable users.
It's amazing how Samsung has built out that foldables lineup, top to bottom. They have practically every option you could possibly want. And here we're still waiting for the first one from Apple. But it is very interesting to see this, ahead of the expected foldable iPhone announcement in September. And so I'm actually, really interested to hear that you're saying that this is kind of the future of the form factor. I mean, you like this a lot more than the candy bar, huh?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest qualm is that neither of these have the camera that my S26 Ultra has. And, not everybody's gonna be able to carry around two or three phones like I am. Um, and as a result, people are gonna have to make a decision. Do they care about camera or do they care about the form factor? And, I'm gonna pull this one out. This is a Razor Fold I also have. I have all the foldables except for the big ones from China, but this one has a great camera. So it's like, okay, maybe you can compromise a little bit on the form factor of the foldable, still have a nice foldable, but also a great camera. So this is gonna probably be the best camera on a foldable. But that's like the biggest compromise, I think.
I have to say, I really like the idea of a foldable. I would love to get one. I finally upgraded to a phone with
A
I've got a
lanyard.
lanyard on my case. I have like a big honking waterproof case, and it came with a lanyard. And I didn't know I liked the lanyard. I love the lanyard. So I thought I would be all into foldables, but now that I've got the waterproof thing and the lanyard, man, I didn't know how much I liked it until I
They're
got both.
starting to actually make foldables waterproof. So if you have, I don't know where my Pixel Fold is. The Pixel Fold is
Wherever that is.
IP65, so you can actually use that in like water incursion.
Yeah, I'm ready for that. So while you were at the Samsung, while you're living it up with all the new Samsung stuff, I was trapped in front of my computer publishing my newest article about Starlink. So that's going to be my first topic that I want to talk about today. So just this morning, I published an article that looks at the performance of Starlink in Brazil specifically. And the reason I picked Brazil, a couple things. One is that Brazil is Starlink's second biggest market. I assume the US is the biggest market for Starlink. But in Brazil, the telecom regulator in Brazil keeps extremely detailed records of everything, including the number of subscriptions each of the big fixed broadband providers has. So you can compare Starlink directly to the big fixed internet providers in Brazil in terms of number of subscriptions. And it turns out that, according to those numbers from Anatel, the Brazilian telecom regulator, Starlink is the 13th biggest provider of fixed broadband. This is fiber, cable, copper, everything. Starlink is the 13th biggest provider in the country with about 1.4% market share. And so when you dig into those numbers, you can also find out the number of customers that Starlink has in urban areas and rural areas. And so anyway, one of the findings in that report is that Starlink actually has more customers in urban areas in Brazil than in rural areas, total number of customers. So that's one finding. Another finding we had out of this report is that you can measure the amount of load on Starlink's network by looking at how speeds in the middle of the night when the network is unloaded compare to speeds during the middle of the day when the network is fully loaded. You can see the gap between those two speeds, and as well as jitter and latency. Anyway, you can tell the depth of the load on Starlink's network in Brazil, and you can always also see how that is changing over time. The interesting thing is that the depth of load was sort of biggest in the fourth quarter of 2025. And this year, the first two quarters of this year, that depth has been decreasing. And so essentially, Starlink has been able to smooth out the performance of its network over the course of a day, smooth out the load on its network, and is essentially getting sort of a handle on the amount of load that is being put on its network by all the new customers that Starlink has in Brazil. So we're able to measure that. And then the final point, there's a lot of stuff in the report. I encourage everybody listening to go out and read it. It's just on ookla.com. Just search for Ookla research. And the final thing that I'll tell you that we found out, lots of interesting things in that report, but the final one I'll point out is that we looked at the number of Starlink customers who move to a new location. So, obviously, satellite internet is unique in that you can take it with you. You can move around with that, and so we measured the amount of movement of other fixed broadband providers, and then Starlink. Obviously, Starlink movement is a lot higher, and so in the first half of this year, more than 12% of Starlink customers in Brazil show at least two locations over the
Interesting.
course of that time period, which is much higher than all the other providers, obviously. But yeah, it's just the Brazilian market offers a lot of interesting insights into how Starlink's network is different than other fixed broadband providers, how it's unique, how it's the same in some cases. Just a lot of interesting findings there. So I enjoyed digging into all that research. And I also, last thing, hat tip to Luke on the Ookla analyst team. He helped me do a lot of the research in here. So I want to give a shout
That's
out to him.
cool.
So thanks, Luke, if you're listening.
I love the data that you guys have access to specifically with Ookla and just the deluge, the volume. It's pretty awesome. The thing that I thought about as you walk through these um, subscriptions and numbers and things like that, um, you know, my mind gravitates towards Brazil does not have great infrastructure. So, like, I'm not surprised that they have a lot of urban users because there's probably a lot of places where they just don't have internet, like
Yeah.
wired. So, and I don't know the state of FWA in Brazil, but I can't imagine it's that great. Um, and even people like in my family I know who live technically uh, in the city, but they're just on the edge of the city and they don't have great internet and they're using um, millimeter wave as their solution and it's like 20 megabits. They're a great candidate for Starlink as well. So I think that's interesting. But in my mind, I feel like Brazil is such a big country that um, it lends really well to Starlink as a solution for broadband. That's why, like, the Australian numbers are so good for them, right? Because Australia is massive, but all the people live on the edges, on the water, basically. So the rest of the country is essentially empty. Um, and yeah, I think that's like a cool market because there's so much, you know, uh, detailed regulator information, and that's always fun. We love good data, right? It's fun not taking shots in the dark. Um, and yeah, it's cool. I think it would be interesting to see how that evolves with time. And it also sounds like Starlink very much has a hold on what their customer base is, what they need, and how they can optimize the experience to improve, like you said, latency and the difference between loaded and unloaded network. So yeah, I think we'll see how that works out long term. But with next gen satellites, that could even solve some of those problems as well.
Yeah. I think my big takeaway from just looking at all that data is that counterintuitively that there's a lot of Starlink customers in the urban areas of Brazil. More than I expected, to be honest, and also that even though overall speeds have shown a little bit of a decline across Brazil, it really looks like Starlink is kind of keeping up with the usage of its network, even as it loads its network with a lot of. I mean, they doubled the number of their global customer base over the course of 2025. So they've been able to essentially keep pace with that demand, even as they're growing the number of customers. So it's I think both of those findings I think are a little surprising to me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll transition to my second topic, which is this happened about a couple weeks ago, but we were out of commission. This was Nokia's AI RAN announcement. It's not even really a new announcement. I think it was more like they gave us more details, but they also created more uncertainty. So this was really them talking about um, their actual commercial AI RAN platform, um, and this is the one that they're building with NVIDIA. So it's a combination of their AnyRAN software and NVIDIA's AI or aerial AI RAN platform, which they are claiming, and this is the big one, that they will get more than 100% spectral efficiency gains by 2028. And they said that they'll get 50% by 2027. So uh, there's obviously a lot of detail that's not being disclosed quite yet, but they did talk about how, um, you know, uh, leveraging the NVIDIA compute is going to be um, a big component of that, and being able to use NVIDIA compute to improve spectral efficiency with a multitude of different technologies and features. Um, and this is not the radio side. This is just the RAN. They've talked about maybe using NVIDIA for the radio side, but that's a different discussion. Um, but yeah, I think that the big thing that people really latched onto um, was the 50 and 100% spectral efficiency improvements. They said that they're already gaining 20% through some of their AI-driven radio innovations. So that's on the radio side, but on the RAN side, obviously, I think that that's a very attractive um, improvement because spectrum is extremely uh, crucial and limited. So I think the other thing to consider is that like this will be launching as a 5G technology and a 5G network first, and then will be software upgradable to 6G. So this will be their 6G solution, but it will obviously leverage NVIDIA's stack, and uh, that 2028 timeframe also sets them up really nicely for 6G.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I think we all knew this was coming. I think it's the speed is a little bit surprising, right? We got the huge NVIDIA investment into Nokia. I think it was just last year, maybe the year before, but already we had this product from Nokia. So, honestly, this is probably the right move for Nokia. They slipped in terms of overall global market share a little bit during the 5G era, due in part to some other chipset choices early on. So I think with this product, it looks like they're trying to get ahead of the 6G game a little bit. And what better way to team with one of the world's most valuable companies and the absolute dominant leader in AI chipsets. It's just it does seem like a pretty smart move.
The one thing I forgot to mention was also that their entire AI RAN platform will be fully ORAN compliant. So they're going that path in terms of making it really easy for operators to, well, really easy, as easy as they can to make it easy to have mixed vendors and um, create a more diverse deployment.
Yeah, and actually that dovetails exactly directly into my next topic. So I'll move on to that if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Because we've been talking about, obviously we're here on the 6G podcast, talk a lot about 6G, and we had another big announcement from the White House about 6G. Obviously, everybody in this administration is aware of 6G, and now we have an official sort of launch announcement from the NTIA for a call to action for 6G leadership. Now, the NTIA is part of the White House. It essentially advises the Trump administration on spectrum policy. And so essentially the NTIA is spearheading this call to action for 6G. And it's essentially a rallying cry to all the countries in the world to work together with the US in terms of creating a sort of foundation for 6G. They list a lot of countries that have already signed on to this initiative by the NTIA, by the Trump administration. Countries include Albania, Australia, Canada, Latvia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Norway, Japan, the Philippines, Korea, Sweden, UK, and the US are among about there's maybe a dozen countries on here. Anyway, not a lot of details, obviously, but this is a first step. And a couple of the things you mentioned the open interfaces for Nokia's product, and that is one of the main initiatives by the NTIA. They want a 6G standard that is the first thing that they list that they want 6G to be is open. They want it open, interoperable, secure, resilient, AI supported, innovative, and resource efficient. Those are the kind of standards that they're using to tackle the 6G industry. So those are the things. So open being the first one, which I think is interesting given all the emphasis on Open RAN over the past decade or so. A couple other things that they mention specifically in this very short document from the NTIA. The first goal is to just identify points of contact within all these governments for 6G. So that they can start meeting regularly about how to implement 6G on an interoperable basis among all these countries. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a race to 6G without some conversation about cybersecurity, transparency, and supply chain, a secure supply chain. And usually when U.S. policy officials talk about a secure supply chain, they're really talking about making sure that
U.S. vendors get a tap.
That U.S. vendors are U.S. vendors and those other countries that have signed on to this agreement are that they use vendors from those countries. So obviously, China conspicuously absent from this, just like in the race to 5G. That's is all about the U.S. against China. So it certainly looks like the race to 6G is forming along the exact same lines. Obviously, the Chinese government has very similar, efforts going on with vendors like Huawei and ZTE. So it does seem like the battle lines have been drawn up during the days of 5G, and they will continue along sort of the same battle lines for 6G. I'd say that just overall general market noise not nearly as noisy this time around as it was in the 5G era. But certainly, early coordination, not a surprise, very much part of the process. But certainly seems like it's getting started earlier and a little more coherent this time around, whereas compared with 5G.
Yeah, well, I think we made a lot of mistakes in 5G. So I think 6G's gonna be a lot smoother. Obviously, we'll make mistakes because that always happens. But those will probably be AI's fault.
Or maybe AI can fix it this time around. We'll see. We'll see how it
we'll
goes.
see.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, I'll do my final topic, which is also a case of I don't know what to call it, irrational exuberance. But basically, this is a light reading article from Ian Morris about the GSMA saying that Huawei is too expensive to rip and replace in the EU, which I thought was hilarious. Because the two vendors who would replace them are European. It's not like it's an American company that's the problem. Yeah, Huawei's been marked as a high risk vendor in Europe. And the European Union's basically saying that you've got to replace network infrastructure with somebody else, which is, Nokia or Ericsson. Could be Samsung, but I don't think they're really in the mix of this for the EU. But they're saying that it's going to cost something like $40 billion. And that's a lot of money for the European Union and its member states. And it's funny because like some carriers have put very different prices on the cost of this rip and replace. BT, which it was Huawei's Huawei's biggest UK customer, said that they actually put the cost at $600 million over several years. And there haven't been any issues for them to make that transition. And obviously they have a time frame to do this. It doesn't have to be done overnight, but it needs to be accomplished. Um, but BT already says that it has no 5G equipment from Huawei in its network today. So they're already well underway. So I feel like there's like this weird um, disconnect between reality and what the GSMA is saying. I will also say, as someone who's attended multiple mobile world congresses, Huawei is a large, large donor to the GSMA. And I think that's something that should be accounted for when hearing such a statement, which is a shame because I wish I could consider the GSMA a completely neutral party here, but um, like I'm not going to ignore how much Huawei I've seen at the GSMA conferences and how influential they've been. So I think I would listen to the carriers more than GSMA. And I haven't really seen, most of the complaining from the carriers happened years ago. So now I think they're just doing what they got to do, and if they run out of money, they'll ask for more. But it doesn't really seem like it's a big problem because BT is a pretty big carrier, and if they were the biggest customer in the UK, they probably would have had the biggest lift. But this might also be coming from maybe the German carriers who also were pretty, leaned into Huawei. Um, but nonetheless, I think this is an interesting conversation because uh, I thought this was a done discussion.
Yeah, right. And I mean, how history repeats itself. Here in the US, we're still going through the Huawei rip and replace process that is administered by the FCC. That program started at least 6 or 7 years ago, if not longer. The cost of that program ballooned from, I think it was less than $1 billion, and now it's estimated up to $5 or $6 billion. It's still ongoing as of today, and the companies that are participating in the FCC's Huawei and ZTE rip and replace program include companies like Viero and United Wireless, essentially these small regional wireless providers, many of them fixed wireless companies, who are essentially getting money from the FCC to tear out their Huawei equipment that they bought, years and years ago, and replace it with trusted equipment from the likes of Nokia and Ericsson. That program has taken much longer than anyone expected and is costing a lot more than everyone expected. So, if the EU embarks on the same kind of effort, and already we're getting price tags of 40 billion, I think you can just guarantee that whatever they're saying now, it's going to be twice as much if they actually implement that, and it's going to take twice as long as anyone expects, just based on the, how the rip and replace program has gone here in the U.S.
I also I think the GSMA is on the extreme end. I think it's actually going to end up being less than what the GSMA says, but I don't think it's going to be as low as what BT has said. So that's why I think it's somewhere. Reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
Right. Yeah. But I will say, once the government says, hey, here's this money to do this thing, you can guarantee everyone's going to estimate at the upper end of
Well, they
what
want
they
more
might
money,
need.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, I would do the same thing. All right. So just to wrap things up, my final item is just a quick recap of the earnings season 2 today. Today is Wednesday, July 29th. So we still do have some earnings still coming up. But we did have many of the big 5G providers have already reported earnings, including AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Comcast, and Charter. So a couple of sort of big themes have come up in the earnings season so far. One is that growth continues. Everybody reported a relatively solid quarter. Some companies are no longer reporting specific customer numbers, but you can kind of tell how they're doing. And essentially, the big headline here is that overall growth in customers is a little bit softer, but still pretty good. Cable companies continue to gain lots of new wireless customers through their MVNO agreements. And I think the financial analysts at TD Cowen summed it up pretty well. They just said, broadly, total postpaid industry customer gross adds were up about 2%. To roughly 10 million. So that's it's not bad. It's just kind of where it is today. During the earnings calls this past couple days, lots of talk about the threat of satellite and D2D. But everybody is very clear that they're not worried about satellite. They're not worried about D2D. They don't think that will affect their business. And no one is still just like they talked about last time or during the last earnings quarter. No one is interested in signing an MVNO agreement with Starlink Mobile. So they talked about that some more. Another takeaway from earnings is that the cable broadband providers continue to lose a lot of customers. So Charter reported the loss of about 166,000 broadband customers. Comcast reported the loss of about 167,000 broadband customers. And so they're still really fighting against encroachment from fiber, from fixed wireless, and now from Starlink fixed broadband satellite. So they're sort of facing threats from a lot of different areas, but they do continue to gain a lot of mobile customers. And then the final, I think, takeaway from earnings season so far is that it really does sound like all of the carriers are going to ease up on device subsidies. So I think when the iPhone 18 comes around in the fall and the foldable iPhone,
Oh no.
Yeah, I do not expect any serious device subsidies or promotional offerings from these carriers, or any aggressive promotional offerings from these carriers,
Which is a
considering
bummer
it's
because
going to
these
be
are
more
all
expensive.
the foldables are all like $2,000.
Yeah. So I think everybody's really trying to back off on the subsidies in order to improve their financials. So it does look like this time around, if you haven't gotten one of the promos, it does not look like they're going to stick around for very long, particularly in the fall.
And yeah, I mean, I've seen that trend of less sales in general, like just no sales, right? Pay the retail price, because a lot of those retail prices are kind of fungible, or at least they were. But I was gonna say, also Qualcomm announced earnings today, and they showed a 20% hit on their mobile business due to the memory shortage. But they have, they announced that they're big in BMW now. They're going to be like the core compute partner for BMW. And their auto business is still going gangbusters. I think they're like the biggest automotive supplier now for chipsets, specifically for the businesses that are in with ADAS and infotainment. So that's huge for them. But yeah, I mean, we're to your point, earnings keep coming, and I think when I was looking at earnings last week, I think it was AT&T and T-Mobile. T-Mobile's earnings weren't that great. They kind of underwhelmed on profit and revenue, while AT&T, focused pretty well on their core business. And I think, it showed. They had more net adds than T-Mobile, and their revenue and profits were good. And, they just keep churning that fiber business. That strategy they started years ago continues to pay dividends. And I got to be honest with you, as an AT&T fiber customer, I could not be happier. And I think that, you know, when I look at places to live, I consider whether or not they have fiber, and AT&T fiber is one of the ones that I'm very comfortable with using because I've been on it for almost a decade now. So yeah, I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff going on in the industry, and earnings seem to be okay, I think is the best way of putting it.
Yeah. Not bad, not great, not bad, just
Yeah.
fine.
I
Yeah.
mean, not SK Hynix or Micron numbers, but also not like, losing money hand over fist
Yeah.
like some companies,
Yeah. Slow and steady. Yeah.
which is like the carrier's whole mantra, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Don't rock the boat too much. But we have, we've seen the news. Verizon CEO seems to be doing pretty well. They hit all their numbers. AT&T continues to, to trumpet convergence. T-Mobile, still keeping on even with their new CEO. So yeah, in terms of the 5G providers, it's a steady as she goes quarter so far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up for this week. I think, you will be going on vacation and I will be out of the country. So we will be back again in a few weeks, probably not with Mike, because he'll be on vacation. I will find some other honorary guest to join me so we don't have a month off. And I hope you enjoy your vacation, Mike.
Thank you. I
Um,
will.
and I hope our listeners enjoyed this week's topics. And if anyone would like to reach out for future topic on another podcast that will happen hopefully in the next week or two, please reach out to us on social media. I'm at Anshel Sag and Mike is at Mike D. Dano. And yeah, we hope you have a great weekend and please tune in again next week ish or two. Thanks a lot, guys.